conversations about a wide range of topics. These were the brown bag discussion sessions. I think today it's especially important to have another round of conversation. It actually is important to consider that this is, of course, the part of the 10th anniversary of ISS as a kind of project, as a conversation, advancing a particular kind of critical discourse, and also defining an academic program. So we take stock of 10 years, of course, and look forward to what is to come in terms of conversation and programs. It also may very well be the last meeting of its kind situated within the framework of Claremont, of the Claremont colleges and of Claremont Graduate University in particular. So a kind of special moment. This should be informal. I have in mind conversation. Obviously, it's in order for you to direct questions to me where appropriate, but it's also in order and expected that we mix it up quite a bit, so there can be exchanges in all sorts of directions. But again, thank you for being here and helping to not only establish but to advance conversation about these things that I would argue really matter, that we have put under the banner of signifying scriptures. So let's open up the floor, the room, the table for conversation. See what you have in mind.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
With the transition and maybe doing more online, your projects in terms of your writing more books and so forth, is there some thought or some intention to reach beyond the academic community to convey the message of scripturalization, to talk about what you're doing, to engage a wider audience somehow?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I accept it as a challenge, assuming you're very much interested in seeing movement in that direction. So the answer is yes, yes, yes. I think that we are, certainly I am, barely beginning to fathom, to take seriously what it would mean to make the conversation, to advance it through internet connectivity. There are all sorts of possibilities that we hadn't pushed as much as we could over the last 10 years. And I can see more clearly now how the context really makes a difference. The pluses and the negatives, so that given what internet connectivity means in our world today, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to make our case to larger and larger publics. So I'm working on framing sort of statement of mission and purpose for ISS that would include kind of an intentional agenda of connecting with thoughtful persons in every walk of life, so-called public intellectuals, but people beyond the circles of the academy. Now, what you've touched on makes me think, and I think this could be one of our running themes, is the extent to which the academy facilitates or limits, delimits, narrows, over-determines the project. And I'm anxious to explore that, to explore what the other side of the divide may mean for us. So the answer in every respect is yes, and so that's also exciting, maybe a little scary in terms of what may be assumptions about what others' interests may be. So we would represent a kind of challenge. We will also be challenged by these larger publics in terms of a reading of the problem and all the politics involved. So, but all of that will be exciting going forward.
The question I had was in line with what Melanie asked. It's at every stage, well, at every sort of isolatable stage, say in New York and then coming to Claremont, there's been a very clear cut statement about what you want to do. And for example, in New York, it was primarily biblical studies, and in Claremont, when he came here, it was about the broader study of religion. And now that you're moving on from this stage, what are the questions that you plan to raise? Are they a continuation of that initial project in New York that you set up, or is it taking a different tenure since these, in light of what you've learned through the last 10 years, who are you going to be addressing in this new, this stage that is going to evolve in the next few years?
Yeah, well, I think it is a continuation of this question. I'm happy to elaborate on it as much as I can, and happy to get feedback, about all of this. I take some issue with your assumptions about the different stages. I do think you're right in reading the move across the mountains in metaphorical, academic, intellectual, politics, transitional terms. I'm not sure about the direction of the movement. The African Americans and the Bible movement was itself a deformation of the Protestant theological paradigm, which, with its refusal to submit such a field to a critical studies paradigm. So the focus on the one people was almost like an anthropological project in which you study a phenomenon in the life of Brian, in this case, a people, in this case, the Black Atlantic. That's what that project was about. It seemed to me, now maybe I don't come to these conclusions as quickly as some others would, but I spent 12 years sort of fussing with that, and I came to the conclusion that no, even at this self-confessed liberal, but it always meant, and that's what I had forgotten, theologically liberal, right? As in we position ourselves within this particular world on the progressive side, but that was kind of a 1950s sort of definition of it. But that did not mean we were willing to rethink the paradigm. It actually meant simply assuming the most progressive positionality within a fairly traditional and conservative paradigm. What the African Americans in the Bible Project represented was a kind of disruption of that paradigm. And so its success made me, along with some others, think about the wisdom of pushing the matter as far as we could, so that the next logical step, it seemed to me, was to construe and construct a paradigm into which any peoples or traditions could be inserted into the critical paradigm. Now, so my own research would continue along the lines of research on the modern Black Atlantic, but I wanted to make sure that the project would invite, would be ambitious enough and capacious enough so that you could think of the study of scriptures in terms of any peoples. And in fact, the most radical position, in fact, was that of making the point that scriptures really have to be about the study of people. Now, I want to make the point that this is a constant. So the emphasis hasn't been taken off that. It's simply been broadened so that one could engage in what we now call critical comparative studies, critical comparative scriptures of a sort. I think the conversation partners, if not audience, I'm not sure I'm happy with audience so much, at a next stage should simply represent culture and society in the sort of broadest terms. That is to say, I think the part of the next challenge is to make the case that scripturalizing in terms of practices really should be understood in terms of culture. That is to say, everybody scripturalizes, and that this is not simply a religious matter or a matter of religious folk. And so that seems to me part of the next challenge that I would want ISS to be associated with, so that culture critics of all sorts, historians of all sorts, would be challenged to think about, to be haunted by the kind of arguments, the kind of projects associated with ISS. So I think there has been development. I think there's been a kind of broadening. It made sense for the precursor, the forerunner in regard to ISS, the FM and the Bible Project, to level a challenge against, given that context, a kind of Protestant theological construct. In this setting, it's clear, and you're right to this extent, however the study of religion is construed. It's not clear to me that it's been construed clearly and tightly enough to make the challenge equally strong or focused. But I think it nonetheless sought to model the advanced study of religion by using the problematic of scriptures as a kind of wedge, which brings on comparison, which brings on politics, which brings on the issues about consciousness and the like. But this is a cultural, broad cultural phenomenon, and one can see its iterations, its effects in all sectors of almost all societies and their cultural kind of scripts and arrangements. So you could think of it in terms of a project focused on this or that culture or this or that domain, right, or sector within a culture. There are all sorts of possibilities, particular kind of practices, subgroups across cultures and the connections that they may make, and so on it goes. I think we've really barely scratched the surface in terms of possibilities. So yes, I think the next step must entail making the point that scriptures are a phenomenon of culture and not merely that which should be relegated to the realm of the religious.
That actually that opens up my question nicely. I was trying to figure out exactly what to ask. So, in your description of sort of this, certainly not a change of direction, sort of just in the broadening of the ISS project to look at the way that cultures in general scripturalize. I wonder, yeah, and you know from our previous conversations that I fall into the camp of I am critical of of reducing everything to culture because I think it keeps everything at the material level. So I do agree with that criticism of Clifford Geertz that it flattens everything. And so I wonder, but I know that you're sensitive to that as well. We've talked about that before. So my question is, do you think, and it may not be worth it, do you think it is at all worth it as the project broadens and engages with the larger cultural discourse, at all worth problematizing that type of reduction? Because it does seem to me that it maintains a kind of agency that is itself an aspect of scriptural civilizations, and that it's in fact, and in this way, as problematic as it is, religion maintains that level of intersubjectivity. That in fact it's not all culture, it's actually all religion, and that it's scriptures that that most clearly exemplify that. So when we talk about, culture is food, culture is dance, culture is this, but it seems to me that scripturalization is, has, to borrow from Richard's research, much deeper roots than that. That these sort of cultural phenomena can shift and play around scriptures which do move, but very reluctantly, and defend their borders very aggressively. Do you think that's is that a debate worth having? Or is that sort of just DOA? Is it sort of dead on arrival? You pigeonhole yourself too much by opening up the door in that direction.
Well, no. Of course I would invite a debate of persons to engage in debate of that sort. I want to be careful to make sure that it's understood that there's a certain amount of play or even playfulness, not a little irony. Maybe in the end, we just haven't gotten close to it yet, paradox in the naming of the project, the discourse, um, and its advancement. So, for example, I mean, you all know that I don't for 1 minute think there's anything one can point to as scriptures per se, right? There's no object in time and space there to be pursued. That it's just kind of a fraught abbreviation or shorthand for a complex of activities, representations, mimetics, and so on it goes. It's enough for me to say that all of that takes place among human beings, among beings who are trying to make themselves human with all sorts of mixed effects. And that takes place within time and space. And we normally refer in shorthand to that in terms of a realm of culture. But I would agree with you, it's certainly far beyond, someone referring to, the food channel and what happens there. Now, I think there's more at stake. I think, we're talking about things that matter most. But it's like the other things in that it is nonetheless a reflection of human making, and the same realm in which all the other activities take place. So actually, I don't need to, it would be enough for me to talk about what these various activities add up to as a kind of effect or mixed effects. And that's what I think scriptures serves as a kind of shorthand. Now, of course, that I'm playing with it. I'm upbraiding it. I'm saying you need to turn it back on itself. That folk who don't want to think at this other level are challenged to see that there's not the there. That's the thing that they base their arguments on, or their politics on, and the like. So it needs to be exploded, it needs to be sort of refracted. At the same time, not using the term then allows its kind of obfuscation to continue, right? With that kind of innocence, that there's something there. So this was intended, I say this because more than 10 years ago, I asked another group of students and a few colleagues to help me think about what to name what became ISS. And there was sort of intense debate that some, in fact, we'll keep it quite general religion, but that goes to the heart of it, that often allows you, that religion as that kind of amorphous thing, and it doesn't allow you, it doesn't push you to deal with the actual problems that we face that have to do primarily with, as you know, I think this has to do with politics of language, structure of consciousness, and the like, and therefore beyond that, there's not a there, right? And sort of focusing on religion itself won't help. This is broader than religion, right? But it's also at the same time much more. It's like you need an analytic, a tool that helps you to get at a kind of precision of criticism that goes far beyond what normally goes for kind of study of religion. So of course, scriptures both antedate and go beyond the structures of religion, this notwithstanding the claim on the part of religious people to own or possess texts, or something like that.
Do you think it would be fair, in that character, and that's quite helpful, and I recognize sort of religion's amorphous character in that exchange. I wonder, though, if there isn't a way in which, so if we can just make a small distinction between sort of civilization as in world civilizations and cultures as in, kind of the broad spectrum from oral all the way up. If there's a way in which what we understand world cultures to be, civilizations to be, that scripturalization is not an aspect of culture, but that culture is an aspect of scripturalization, and that it's actually one is subordinate to the other, and that you can in fact have one today without the other. They're appended to scripturalization. Civilizations, as we construe them. Look at a map. Any geopolitical organization is going to follow along scriptural lines first. And they're going. Right now, maybe going to war over it in Ukraine. So in that way, to even load up the term even more and give it even more freight. I wonder if that's something. Is that sort of in line with what?
Of course, I agree with that, and it touches on the play on words that allows you to go to a deeper level. The baseline understanding, which allows you then to get to a kind of profound level and complexity, talking at first about just things, written things, just scripted, but of course end up being used in a way that would suggest that this is all a matter of, this is political and social psychological, and never turned around an object per se. That is, people who are left at the level of material or the object are the ones who show that they have been done in by the very process itself. And so the challenge remains how to reach them, help them understand what work has been done on them, sometimes literally on them, but certainly in terms of that politics. Do you want to?
Yeah, it seems to me the risk of adopting kind of a flat sense of culture or a flat sense of religion or scriptures goes to sort of the larger matter that I think critical studies is after, and that is that the object of study is not essences, but the process of essentializing things so that we forget that there was a process in the first place, that they're just these products. And so I think the signifying on scripture's sort of notion is reminding us, part of the play there is that, scriptures are important because we've convinced ourselves that they're beyond signifying, they just have significance, right? And the sort of play reminds us to think, oh yeah, so wait, how does this work, and how did we get here, and what did we do to do it? And it's a historical question, it's a psychological question, it's a sociological question, and I think the tension for us, kind of on this side of the project, is to remember, yes, that's what we're doing. Like, we don't mean culture in the flat sense, but also, yeah, like convincing the people who are convinced that there are these essences out there, there's this stuff that we can pick up and study, and that's the whole point, that there's more than that. I guess is always how I've taken it. But I wonder about I've noticed, I think throughout the last 10 years, this really careful, space to recognize scriptures as not universal, but almost universal or near universal. And I wonder, what do we have in mind, or what do you have in mind with the precision there, or maybe leaving space for, is there something else? It reminds me of an essay in Theorizing Scriptures. I think it's R.S. Suruki-Tharaja, who talks about the known knowns and unknown knowns, playing on Donald Rumsfeld. What is that, like, known unknown or known known there that we're, or is that just part of the, it could be just part of the critical enterprise that we should know by now that we don't know everything.
Yeah, I think that's
always haunted me, I guess.
Yeah.
That at this point.
Well, Richard, if that's the only thing that you've done, if that's okay, we're probably in good shape then. Look, I think at one level, it's just probably the scholars, the careful scholar's penchant to qualify or leave room for exceptions. That is to say, you know, in all the circles that we're ever likely to come in contact with, they are effects or reflections or projections, products of scripturalization. That doesn't mean that within any particular framework there aren't those who kind of fall to a degree below a level of kind of you know, direct influence, overweening, something like that. So you leave room for exceptions and the like. One can also think of, in the modern world, never mind history, but in the modern contemporary world, situations that represent what some scholars have talked about in terms of a lag. And I would say, you know, that would hold for scripturalization as a way simply of describing, kind of analyzing how we've been put together, right? Whatever you call that that arrangement in other terms. The one last thing I would say is that you know, I would say that in the modern order, the EG that I know best in terms of social cultural formation, the Black Atlantic, has represented precisely that lag, a kind of just inside, mostly outside, not, you know, not quite, almost, you know, the Equiano's sort of rhetoric, which I broaden. I think he is fully representative of the Black Atlantic experience in that term. You could fill in the blank with others who have been, as we say, minoritized, or you know, whatever that may mean in the context of an empire. So that's something of what I'm getting at. So it doesn't mean that we all experience it in the same way, to the same degree. Du Bois's double consciousness is a way of describing that kind of odd positionality, not quite the center, but by virtue of the violence of positionality, forced to look more deeply or again and again at center. People at the center take it for granted. But that other positionality represents potential epistemic advantage, because I'm always having to look at myself being looked at by you, you know, that kind of doubleness. Now, dominance almost by definition means you don't have to think about that. So that's a kind of odd position and a kind of lag. And so that kind of qualification is that's an example of what I mean there, and that's the stuff of a history of scripturalization, right? All kinds of trajectories and developments based on positionality, among other things. Jump in.
Kind of nuts and bolts question. You just said you made a statement that in this new development you were more interested in your conversation partners and not the audience?
Oh, I just simply meant, I don't think of it as audience for me. It could be something kind of old school about me in that respect. I shy away from the hint of performativity in that regard. So, you know, I'm not sort of tap dancing. I don't think of it that way. I want people to argue with me, be part of a debate, a conversation, and projects. So I don't think of bringing in people to so that I or others may perform for them. That's sort of a little thing, that kind of difference, but that's all I had in mind.
So, I had that in mind because, well, my friend, he's really interested in paleobiology, and he reads a lot. He's taking some courses in community college, and one day I was trying to explain what the ISS is about, what we do.
Yeah.
And he says, that's not for me. I just, like the other day in class, I like the way we do it. Everything it's just facts. We just have one thing. There's only one possibility when you.
Okay.
My question was, so far, the ISS has primarily been speaking with an academic scholarly world. How would it need to change this new going ahead, the way we take forward the message, how we package it, how we word it, and what would there be? How would you address, say, like my friend who just wants facts and just one possibility for an answer?
Well, I can't. I leave you to the friend to wrestle with that, because there's just so much that you have to try to address with with that kind of attitude. Look, I'm not sure. What I'm saying is that I'm excited about what it may mean to open this up to the mixed publics worldwide, which is what the internet has the potential for reaching, for engaging. And I think I may very well certainly learn how better to translate what I think is compelling about this kind of discourse. And I think actually leaving an academic professorial post can be better understood as the exciting possibilities rather than any kind of anything that's negative. So I'm not even interested in them. But the possibilities going forward. I was speaking to most of the colleagues I've heard from, without the details, are really seem to share a sense of my excitement about what that could open up. If you think about what we're dealing with, if I'm right that this is a kind of near universal phenomenon, even if it's experienced differently, of course, then there must be a way of speaking to what this means to the publics that are part of the internet. And I think what we're talking about are issues that have to do with how we experience power, dominance, the way that works through language or discourse, which is another way of talking about scriptures. That's what scriptures, they're just shorthand for a certain politics of language, discursive formations and the like. Sometimes they're blunt and powerful with their violence. Sometimes, more often than not, they're quite veiled and represent a kind of modern day masking and the like. The internet itself, once you begin theorizing more consistently about it, it seems to me can be easily connected to the kind of problematics that are part of scripturalizing from antiquity to this very moment, because you're talking about politics of communication and discourse and the like. So it seems to me that there are just lots of potential for making a wider, broader case. Now, the one other thing I want to say is that, of course, I want to hear from all of you and others who will be listening in on this conversation about ways to engage in these broader terms. The big issue, it seems to me, turns around making the connection between the kind of critical consciousness that a focus on scriptures in the key that we're talking about, making a connection between that and a healthy social body. See what I'm getting at? A connection between our reaching a kind of critical level. You seem to like excavation, and that's what we're talking about, as opposed to, exegesis. So reaching that level of critical consciousness about what scriptures are all about. In other words, I'm arguing that there's no breakthrough, I'm willing to stake a lot on this, in critical consciousness if it does not include breaking through scriptures. So we must make the connection between that breakthrough and the ills and foibles of our time. And I think there is a powerful connection, and I think the Academy mostly is uninterested in our making that connection. In fact, wants us not to make it, because it has to turn back on them. So I'm not saying anybody's worked it out, the fine point, but I'm committed to engaging others around it. But it's that connection that needs to be made. I need it for myself, and I think we can make the case that other larger mixed publics ought to be interested in this. In fact, find it compelling. The connection between breakthrough in thinking about scriptures, which is also thinking about thinking, right? And communication and how we are shaped and formed, and how best to put this, something like comedy. I hate for it to be brought to the level of a kind of simple world peace. What I mean is neither the individual, right? Just Jason Hebert as an individual, set apart from others, nor the social body, as in the world, can be healthy until scriptures are not so much fully investigated or excavated, but until we're in that mode, right? Because it's a sort of process going ever deeper and turning back on itself. So that kind of connection is what I think needs to be made, and I accept that as the big challenge going forward. And I will tell you that after a career of now almost 32 years that I'm pretty much satisfied with, I'm convinced that this is not the work or agenda of the Academy. No, I think there's some good things there, but that's not what making that connection, right, is not, that's not part of the system. And I think that's a compelling reason for something like ISS or whatever else it may be named.
Well, related to this is actually, I think, a bit of a gear shift.
Yeah.
but you mentioned the internet a couple of times in using it, and so this was something I had mentioned before in my response to the 10-year forum that we had. But the role of the internet as a new and developing scripture, and a number of issues have already been raised here. Its relationship to the politics of language and language games,
right,
and who destabilizes there. The role of new tools that it affords, but also the way that I would say this ubiquitous connectivity shapes thinking and all of that. And so to hear from you, from anyone else, if they have thoughts on this, the relationship of the internet to the academy and the way it, again, destabilizes authority centers and things like that, if that's on the agenda as the ISS is looking to utilize the internet more in its...
Yeah, I think that would be the means of staying connected, which, by the way, does not mean, this goes all the way back to Melanie's question, it does not mean that the circle that ISS will represent will never come together in physical terms. I think we're still open to that. It's just that it would be on different terms, independent of an academic community per se, and that will represent challenges and also other kinds of possibilities, most of which are good, as I see that. So, Jason, your questions are they're good questions. I would prefer to see them as the questions to be addressed as we go along. So I don't want so much closure on those now. But I have been raising those questions for myself, and actually as I'm being tutored by some in this group and beyond. But see, I'm thinking of it just as the internet represents tool and technology. That's precisely what the scriptures represents, and bringing the two together represents possibility for a level of self-reflexive thinking that's got to be good. That's got to be quite important. So it's the media message question. Which determines what, and even over-determines and influences and the like. I don't for a minute buy the argument of the critics. I've read a fair amount in this direction, who think that this represents kind of an ultra-democratic sort of arrangement. I mean, this was actually not. I turn it around and say that this was precisely the sort of questions, if you put your history of religion's hat back on, that was raised in relationship to that other technology, writing and the like. And we see how that turned out. Well, what it means, of course, is that, of course, Foucault was right. Power is not some thing over there. Oh, let's go get some power. That power is always the set of relations that obtain between us, whatever the whatever the technology. And so it obtains, in this case, also with the internet. We're just beginning to kind of figure out actually what it may mean. But so at different levels. One, ISS wants to exploit it as a technology going forward, and I think there's some exciting possibilities. I think also what it represents as a technology ought itself to be part of the subject matter, the thing to be studied when one considers scriptures itself as technology and media.
Okay.
Exciting.
To go back to one of the earlier points, but also to bring in one of the things that Richard had mentioned, sort of the understanding of how we think about culture, how like sort of on this side, as you said, on this sort of this side of the table. But we do, and to your earlier sort of, sort of wanting to distance yourself from the idea of an audience. But it seems to me that that is one of the central problems of the project going forward. And problems to be, sort of challenges to be accepted. Probably challenges is a better word than problem. Because there is no sans audience in anything that we produce. So the ISS's audience was academics for, maybe not yours, but who were reading the publications, who were attending the conferences, who were up to speed. I mean, there may have been sort of orbital outliers that were kind of listening in. But it's a specialized language, it's a specialized field, wrestling with, patristics and all of this stuff, even if it's being jettisoned. You and anyone else that engaged in that project had to know the language to do it. And so the audience is like built in already. So it seems to me that the project going forward has to be sensitive to the issue of audience, not in the sort of meanest aspect of performativity, but in the unavoidable aspect of performativity, in that, in this sort of exchange, this communication. But in that, I actually see a tremendous amount of opportunity for your sort of like leaving the academy and moving outside of that sort of domain, to precisely broaden that, because those politics of language are actually used quite adeptly on our side of the table, very effectively, to sort of separate ourselves from the hoi polloi, who, that we have the advantage of education in many instances, in this discourse, in this sort of ability to talk even about discourse. So in that way, I see it more as sort of a challenge to be embraced and to really, in all of the valences of this term, to be exploited, because it's precisely, I would argue, it's precisely the way in which the humanities have sort of like solidified their irrelevancy in a public debate, and I think that that's something that's self-imposed on our part, people that are trained like us. So anyway, that's sort of my kickback to that.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Melanie and Richard.
Well, yeah, it's something that you trigger. I guess I'm thinking of interpreters or translators. How do you bridge? Because the people who are perhaps, well, we're all scripturalized, but the people who are perhaps most dominated or are most exploited by the regime are the people who don't have a handle on this language to capture these thoughts and ideas. So I immediately thought when you were talking, Travis, who then would be the interpreters? Who would be the translators? How would our academic, intellectual speak be made available then to people who really have the mind and the interest to avail themselves of understanding and studying this? Because if we're talking about a healthy society, a healthy broader world, how does that happen if the majority of people can't speak the language to even access this concept of thoughts? How do you get it? Go ahead.
Well, I think that, from my perspective, the issue's not so much the language we use to speak about the issues, but recognizing that the natural constituency, if you will, is that most people are not the ones with the sort of, like, on the beneficiary end of power. Like, as far as the power relationship goes, it's not the ones, most people are not the ones, and they've never been the ones that are, are in control. That's how control works, right? And it's determining how we can be in conversation with both people on, either side of power, right? In that relationship. One, the people who, in their own way, are probably asking, or we know are asking, these questions about, well, why do I don't have this and you do have this? And then also getting the people who are on the other side, who are in power, so to speak, to be asking those questions too, to sort of destabilize that. Like, if we're having that conversation, that's a pretty big conceit on both sides. And I see this somewhat in scholarship with sort of the anthropological concern of like, quote unquote, going native, right? Or being challenged by the people you're studying. Like, I have my students reading, they read a chapter of Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, which this whole book turns around this highly reputable scholar encountering or studying this man from Papua New Guinea who asks, why is it that you people have so much cargo and my people don't? And Diamond has to go and think, do a little navel gazing, do a lot of transdisciplinary study and all this stuff to figure out, well, why is it that some people have stuff and others don't? And it's that having conversation partners or being cooperative in the act of having these conversations that I think is what's going on. So I think it's not about the language, but it's about listening in some ways. It's listening as well as translating, and going to places where the conversation's already happening and figuring out how we can either what we have to say or what we can listen to, and then where the conversation's not happening, where do we push the point and perhaps stay alive long enough to do so.
Yeah, I'm not sure I need to address all of these issues raised in the last round. I'm simply not. I'm likely not to be given to thinking about engaging people as in terms of their being audience and my being whatever is on the other side of that. But I actually find that a small matter, not nearly as important as, for example, thinking about what, and Travis did touch on this as well, what it means no longer to be an academic with these sorts of interests. And it may be that this way of talking about it actually squares with your challenge, but I'd put it in a different way. See, I think that in order to pursue a critical studies program around scriptures, one, and I'm showing it now, one needs to get out of it. That is, one has to get beyond the academy, because the academy, by virtue of its constitution and its politics, cannot sustain that interest, that project. Now, I see some of you nodding. I think you know what I mean by this. So we're very close to this. This is at the edge. I've tried it in all sorts of settings, and I'm kind of a living witness. I can do a commercial, I think, around this sort of thing and say, I've tried it, and yes, it's don't try that product. Go here. And so there's a sense in which getting outside the academy, however, is an opportunity to reach these other publics. Whether someone else wants to call them audience or not doesn't really matter to me right now. I'm just saying other publics, larger publics, extra academy. And it's also important to say that this doesn't mean dumbing down. It means going higher and farther. I think it will be an opportunity to make it more scholarly, rather than succumb to one of the lessons I hope you'll learn is that, context does make a difference. Often you aren't aware of how it works on you, that it will have a subtle but powerful effects on the kinds of questions you raise, the kinds of issues you pursue, how aggressively you may pursue them, how consistently, and so on it goes. Just think about where most people are and how context makes a difference with them. There are plenty of stories to be told. So what I have in mind is, even at the prospect of failing, is taking the risk of taking the discourse outside of the academy to actually make it more critical, more intellectually sophisticated. So I may not be addressing the kinds of questions that Melanie's raising about how many to reach. I'm not sure that I need to, or ISS needs to reach every human being in direct terms. That's not what I'm talking about. I think there are all sorts of ways you can be of influence that is really quite powerful in terms of kind of overlapping kind of influences. Sort of like a student of Professor Travis Webb may catch fire in terms of ISS. I'll never meet her, right? That kind of influence, right? Somebody out of Elizabethtown, you know, that's what I mean. But it could also be some unnamed person in southern Nigeria who'll never get out of southern Nigeria, but can be connected to us. That's also what I have in mind. Who would have access to our conversations, our programs, interviews, a magazine, the kind of debate that will ensue. Discussion about a more recent publication, and on it goes. So yes, I do hope the audience is wider, broader, mixed public, and by that I mean other. Sometimes, this may offend some of you and may be kind of frightful, sometimes the extra academic public is actually the more thoughtful because it's more open to, right, the kind of construction of argument and project, and there won't be the same kind of push-pull that defines the that is reflected in the socialization of the academy, right? The academy, for example, wants you to master texts. Now that's what it's based on, all right? Now, the extent to which you make all sorts of, and I mean across the fields. Now, you know, we've got some stuff now that it's kind of extra kind of academic, kind of lately come to the academy. Now I'm really showing my age when I say I don't really kind of understand that, but you know, all right. But I mean the kind of traditional fields and some offshoots. Even the offshoots, as I'm better tutored about them, are all based on mastery of text. That's the academy. It doesn't really care about the politics that's involved in the conditions for the production of and the reception of them. That the main line, the centerpiece of it, is mastery of text, meaning a kind of discourse, the way it may be called in this or that field, but it's all scriptural. We just supply the language for it, and that's why I think it's important not to walk away from it, but problematize it. It's all scriptural study. Now, it's totally uninterested in, and maybe invested in, your not looking at the conditions of production and of communication and reception and so on it goes. In other words, that kind of interstitial stuff. And the stuff kind of, you know, underneath it all. In between and underneath. And that's what I think a critical scriptural project should really be all about. And one can more easily, I'm banking, you know, the kind of few remaining years I have to work on this, that there are extra academic, thoughtful persons who will want to engage around those issues. I think it may very well, we will discover it's easier to engage outside of that construct than inside. Now, if 30 plus years count for anything, I may be on to something. I could be totally naive about it, but this is what I've been thinking about for 30 years and experimenting with and hitting walls. It's all text, it's all scriptures, that's what it's about. All the fields, all of them, mastery of text. That's what it represents. But it's not about a kind of deformation of them and of it, the it being the phenomenon itself, the very politics of constructing society around mastery of text. So, for example, we are beyond, far beyond the point of ever electing or putting someone in a position of leadership who does not reflect that kind of mastery. Now, it's kind of simple, it's kind of over-the-top example. You've heard this before, but that's how basic it is. And we just build atop that. And so then it's mastery where you can actually even obfuscate or feign not as much mastery. That's, you know, the politics are so ingrained and layered that you can flip back toward a kind of politics of not having mastery, which is itself mastery of the text and of discourse. That's the world we live in, right? Now, what is the field that looks at this, right? It has to be created, right? You have to, it needs to be a kind of wedge issue. Study of religion, I don't mean just, you know, you can just look at that as a kind of a standard bearer, almost a kind of distillation, is all study of text. So that's kind of the centerpiece. That it's all study of text. Now, what does that mean? Well, so what has happened that religion is just text? Who looks at that? Now, that's what I mean by a critical studies perspective on scriptures. And again, I want to make the connection to the ways in which we are made human, made individual, and the way we are constructed, shaped as cultures and societies, a larger kind of cultural and social formation.
In the widening of the circle of the questions, of the data, of the participants in the conversation, I wonder then, is this sort of natural, perhaps progression's not the right term, but sort of the trajectory to come that, you know, it continues to be a sort of neo-Hoodoo way, I think, is referenced at various points. In other words, like the institution, or the institute, you know, is becoming less of a sort of institute in the traditional sense. What does that mean for, you know, what it looks like for you and what it looks like for us? I mean, it's no longer going to be necessarily sort of the director, associates, assistants relationship, but maybe new sorts of relationships. I wonder kind of how is that, do you have ideas of how that maybe, not necessarily how it's going to take shape, but maybe how it has taken shape?
Yeah.
Because I heard a sense of that at the 10-year forum, just like hearing about sort of conversations you've had with other associates, you know, whether you've interacted with someone who's really shown you something, or in White Man's Magic, in this sort of autobiographical pieces, like there's some really interesting critical points about, I guess, how you see yourself now as understood sort of as, you know, boy, shaman, priest, for having mastered the text in these certain ways, as if the people who laid those titles upon you were somehow not knowing. Like, of course they were knowing, you know, and of course the mastery of text was all a performance in a sense.
Of course.
I wonder how much more of that will come to the surface for, I guess, all of us. I mean, all participants. Doesn't this all sort of destabilize us? I mean, it all is supposed to kind of make us uncomfortable for good.
Well, I don't know.
Maybe that's a crazy
they're just
question,
very good questions. Let me just say, for one thing, I think that so ISS would want to beckon all, invite all, whatever your status, and just be an associate for one thing. So that kind of flattening would be in order. I am thinking about it in terms of whether it's traditional institute or not. I don't really know. Richard, there is I mean, there are some other examples to think about, just as I think there are a few others. Just as I think there are a few others. A friend yesterday reminded me of this, that what I'm doing is, quite odd. He's probably thinking insane, but he said quite odd, and not many people do this sort of thing. So you could think of both ISS and Wimbush actually, if not uniquely modeling something different, something that's rare, and it may be a good thing. Like somebody ought to do this. Somebody ought to try it. And I've been reading a book. It's been in my library for a long time. Oddly published by MIT Press by a collection of artists called Failure. And what they have in mind, it's meant to be provocative, is simply persistent experimentation. That the idea that you wouldn't approach a work of art as though you can't start, or you wouldn't take the second and third step unless you could assure yourself that it's going to be the sort of perfect representation, whatever that may mean. That's kind of a profound moment, but you think about that, I think most of us operate around some sort of stricture. So an odd kind of institute, yes, membership, far-flung around the world, kind of one level, leaning into one another. The assumption is that kind of willing to take leave of some of the practice and politics of one's own field, discipline, interest. You could be a corporate trader, for that matter, and be part of it, and lean into a conversation of a different sort. And what it might mean to have an institute that's independent, in this case of the academy, leaning in this direction. We have examples of conservative think tanks all over the place, independent of universities and doing some other things. A few in politics on the left, but nothing quite like this, having anything to do with what people associate with religion. So I don't know. We'll see what happens with that. I think I'm also modeling something different. It's fraught with lots of minefields, but overall governed by the excitement about the prospect of being able to facilitate the growth of this ISS as a kind of movement. And again, I want to connect it with its sort of subject matter. If I'm right about it, I think there's something quite powerful can be made of it. That is the kind of connections that can be made. I am absolutely convinced that what I have in mind would not be possible. That is to say, apart from persistent disrupting forces in the context of the academy. And I don't know anybody who today could convince me otherwise. I'm just convinced that this is the way to go with it. So I don't think it's a matter of the foibles of this or that place, but how the academy for now is organized. I will say, in a way of beginning a closing, that it may be that at least I'm about to convince myself of this. It may be that what I'm facing is sort of being out of time. I obviously mean a little ahead of time rather than its opposite. And I sort of think that among some other issues that I've studied in terms of genealogy or historical development, that with this issue, in time, there will be some who will wonder, if not what the fuss is about, why hadn't this been done? What prevented this? And the issue will be, why hadn't people made this connection, or why hadn't the doors or windows open for something like this? And I think that is to come. And maybe you will see that happen. I don't know. But yes, an odd institute because it's the interstitial issues that fall between the discourses of mastery of texts that we're focused on. So it kind of needs a different context, or different atmospherics.
I think I was going to ask, will you still use an institution as umbrella, and you leave it open in a sense?
You mean another academy, another school? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and my intervention has to do with your background. It concerns your background.
Uh-huh.
And first off, I should say that I'm not against you. So it seems that you started with biblical studies, and Bible. Amazon presents you as a Bible scholar. If we check your books, this is a Bible scholar. And I like when Dr. Marvin Sweeney is saying to his class, he taught here in our school for 9 years, New Testament studies. He was professor of New Testament classes. Your theology also, strong theology, and Greek, all those. When you came here in 2003, I saw the way Kima presents. You're coming here, text, symbols, symbolic power, Pierre Bourdieu. What does that mean? Signifying on scriptures. Now it's 10 years. I heard the way you were conversing with our assistants. It seems that we're heading toward ethnology, cultural studies. Yeah, because that's what scripture is about. Scripturalization is about people and culture. And as you said, it's not narrow, it's broad, and it could mean several things. And I understood all those. I want to ask, with a lot of respect for you, how was your experience teaching Bible classes before your background in New Testament theology? And me, sometimes I feel that probably it's not what you wanted to do, and now it's it's something new. And I said to you in an email, the Buddha, you receive an inspiration for, because sometimes it's difficult to understand, but when we've come to understand it, it's so good and it's meaningful. And what you want to do with the Institute and what you're teaching. Yeah, your career, sometimes Kima pointed that out several stages. Do you plan to go to another, what do you plan to, will it be the same? Yeah, how did you feel?
I'm not sure exactly what your, what is your
my question? How did you feel before, when it was not, when you were not at that level?
Yeah, I've actually written about this in the African Americans in the Bible introductory essay, so you ought to take a look at that. I actually think it's probably better. I'm not sure I'm in a good position to answer your question. It's probably better, it will be better for someone who cares to notice and to study, but maybe using me as a, as an exemplum, to look at these sorts of issues. Now, this is my best. We'll make this the last comment from me, and I'll do my best to at least begin to address your question. But again, I want to direct you to the introductory essay in African Americans and the Bible. And there's a little bit in Theorizing Scriptures, a little bit more in White Man's Magic. So I actually have already defined myself as a scriptural formation, as a product of that socialization. And I think I very much gravitated toward the field, only because I thought I had some capacities in the field. It was sort of like, as it was introduced to me, it was sort of like putting a puzzle together. But I actually thought that because ancestors' proddings, that sort of probing in that direction, I would be able to find a kind of clearer reflection of that kind of social self. So that's why I sort of got into the studies in the first place. Well, so you had to do a lot of, had to do the song and dance that represented the field, and that meant, I can say now, sort of becoming, good German Lutheran and all the stuff that pertains to that. So they said mastery, and I said, oh, okay, well, I can do that. Did that. And I think that the problem had to do with my being confronted with the idea that, with the experience that you were supposed to go only so far with questions, only so far with the kind of broad questions that would reverberate back to a kind of modern self. So the whole field was constructed in terms of antiquarianist interests and ideals. And again, it would be better if some others saw this and clarified it, because there may be some things I will miss. But as best I can figure, it's probably safe to say that others will confirm this, that I was probably read as someone who proved mastery of texts, but would not leave well enough alone. And the not leaving well enough alone, meaning my wanting to speak, as in the way that Spivak talks about, speaking back and the like. And that meant that I was interested at a certain point in kind of deforming the field or the mastery. And that's sort of the beginning of this project or initiative, and explains how we've gotten to ISS for whatever it may mean. So those early years, I think testimonies, there are students around, they're all alive. I am a 20th century person after all. We'll say that I pretty much did what I could to deform the field precisely in the context of the paradigm, the Protestant theological paradigm. So, for example, I asked, and there's students who tell tales about this, but I asked for an introduction course, introduction to. I asked students the question, Is the Bible an ancient or a modern text or phenomenon or something like that? And that was that was a kind of renegade question. It seems not maybe not so terrible on this end of things for you all. But I refuse to begin the study of in an ancient moment. It had to be in my moment or our moment. So that's what I did quite regularly at the beginning of my career. And I think that's quite consistent with where I am now. Now, it's a long trajectory and trek, but that's what I decided I had to do in order to sort of stay afloat. So, we can continue this discussion on some other auspices, but I do think that you're probably registering some anxiety that I know about very well.
Yeah, because it's personal too sometimes.
Yes, and because I think that I actually have high hopes for you. It probably now won't be, I won't see it within the framework of any kind of academic program, but I think this is going to happen outside that framework anyway. But you're going to have to do some deep excavation work to come to terms with what has already happened to you in terms of scriptural formation. And I think that's partly why you're interested in the text, but it's going to take a lot of hard work to get there. Not of the sort that they say you should engage in, but a different sort altogether. And I wish you well in that endeavor. You've got to do it for your own sanity. Okay? A wrap? Thank you very much. Are we done?
I think we're done. I actually have another question.
Oh, please.
So, in the larger arena, pretty much the paradigm that is allowed to speak across the disciplines currently are the sciences, whichever science you want to pick: chemistry, physics, biology, psychology, and is there a sense in which, and even Bella, I mean, so he goes to Donald, so they, and
he goes
to Merlin Donald.
Yes.
His last, I mean, that's
right.
Sort of experimental psychology, cognitive psychology, and so and obviously I know those are interests of yours as well. You obviously take everything you can to sort of to make your soup, but I wonder if have you thought, is it a concern for you, or is it something, have you put thought about how to engage that that sort of conversation in the culture? Because the sort of science and scientific jargon and scientific simplifications rule the day in what is considered serious intellectual discourse in the public sphere. Certainly not, in the academy and stuff like that. So, is that something that you feel like, can the ISS sort of ally itself in strategic ways with those conversations, or is it something that needs to be directly confronted?
Conversation with is sort of the way to go, and I would think any organization of knowledge, any research that leans into this question about what goes into human making now is it should be embraced, should be engaged, should be open to that. I will, however, say this, that I'm at a point where I think that I'm sort of beyond this typical move on the part of scholars in our fields, obviously including religion, but beyond that, where you take this kind of strange step of importing So you'll read some theory and kind of, import it onto, just kind of like dressing, put it on it. What I want ISS to represent, I think my work is beginning to represent this, and the projects that are lined up should represent this, is that this is a phenomenon that can itself represent, it is the stuff of theory. That is, I want it to represent the theorizing itself. So it's an argument about using a particular phenomenon or site, one could say, for theorizing about human making. So that's what I think scriptures, among other things, should represent. And what I mean by that is that it obviously includes, we've already made explicit that the study of scriptures should be that it's the history, rhetorics, anthropology, sociology, social psychology of scriptures. That's something quite different from a wholesale importation of another theoretical construct and imposing it on a chapter of some ancient text. That's not what we're interested in here. I think that's gone. Now, will people continue to do that? Yes, but I'm talking about it's gone in terms of being game for the critical studies. But there's no such thing yet as anthropology of scriptures, the social psychology of. See, that's its own kind of theorizing ground, and it's sort of organic. And so what I would want is to invite the Bellas and the Donalds, into the room, the table, to look at this. So I think part of my task is to say to them, this is what you need to be studying, that this Bella is part of what you were fussing about. It needs to be, we need to make this more explicit, that's what we're doing. It's not looking at some other thing, because there's no other thing. It's the way one organizes the knowledge, or arranges the questions, or lines them up, or kind of connects them, if you will. So I think at base we're talking about, in evolutionary scientific terms, the human who has learned to use language. That's where scripturalizing comes from. It's like atop all of that, and I see it, in fact, as this is part of the title of the next book. It's simply the ultimate politics of language. In that respect, so that brings, it seems to me, everybody into to a table to talk about what I think of as a sort of human making, kind of again and again and again, not done just once. But that is, at any rate, the way I approach theory. It's I think the kind of contribution that a student of religion and culture can add to this. And I don't think that, and that's a different kind of performance, if you will, from if I'm no longer a biblical scholar, it's not the kind of interest that a biblical scholar has. But I was, of course, interested, maybe I failed, in modeling a different kind of agenda for that kind of scholar. And there may not be very many takers, and I think that in that regard, one ought to run, one ought to escape. Okay?
Yeah, I'm for you.
Is that enough?
I'm for you.
You're for me?
I'm the chief of the army of the Lord.
Well, that sounds awesome. I don't know. I hope I am in front of it, because
Jericho.
all right. Okay. Kime, is that